I used to love fishing, or at least I thought I did. I fished on most of the major lakes in Georgia and many of the small ones too with my parents and my grandparents, though there were two or three that we spent most of our time on. I studied the craft of fishing when I wasn't at the lake, the river, or the stream. At stores, I would walk slowly through the aisle with fishing equipment, oohing and eyeing over rods, reels, lures, and tackle boxes. I would look at fishing boats the way that most of my friends looked at cars. I even had a subscription to Bassmaster magazine. I was hardcore, or at least I thought I was. But one day I realized that I had more fun thinking about fishing than I had actually fishing. And that realization spoiled everything because it led to an epiphany. I didn't love fishing, I loved catching. And there's always a lot more fishing than there is catching during a fishing trip. So I lost interest in boats, rods, reels, and tackle boxes, and I simply walked away. Sometimes we are only interested in a small part of an overall experience, like getting a job only for a paycheck, getting married only for romance, or praying only because we want a problem solved. I haven't gone fishing in decades because I was only interested in a small part of the experience, catching fish. So, two things are true. I'll never catch another fish, and I won't enjoy all of the other parts of a fishing trip: sunshine, nature, water, my friends, my family, and all the rest, unless I change my mind and go fishing. I used to love baseball too. I played baseball as a child in the local recreation league, even though I wasn't very good at it. I got really excited when I learned that you could watch professional baseball on television. I stayed up late on school nights watching baseball, and I remember the early days of Ted Turner owning the Braves and showing their games on Channel 17. I wasn't the kind of fan that would memorize stats, but I knew the names and I knew the legends. The Braves were thrilling to watch in the early 90s, later on in my life. The entire Southeast would go to work or school sleep deprived during baseball season. I remember the exhilarating postseason wins and the soul-crushing disappointments of those World Series games where our Atlanta team would come oh so close to winning everything, only to let us down in the end, hoping to try again the next season. Finally, in 1995, the Braves brought it all home, but never again so far. In the 90s, the Braves made 5 World Series appearances and won one of them. They teased us by getting into the series in several other seasons since the miracle year of 1991. But in the midst of all that, I had another epiphany. I didn't really love baseball. I wasn't an admirer of the players for their skill and their athleticism. I wasn't really a student of the game. I was a fan of winning. And when winning wasn't to be had, I wasn't interested. I gave the Falcons a shot along with most everyone else in 2016, but we all know how that turned out. The last book of the Bible assures us that in the end, God wins. Well, I'm pretty sure that in the last chapter of the NFL playbook, it says, in the end, Tom Brady wins. I had to begrudgingly give Tom Brady my admiration for his victory in the most recent Super Bowl this year. I'm pretty sure that if I live to be 85, Tom Brady will still be winning football games from his wheelchair. After that disappointing Super Bowl loss in 2017, I had a conversation with an acquaintance about my disenchantment with professional sports. He spit the words with disdain in his voice. "You're just a fair weather fan." As if observing a football game from the safety of one's couch is an opportunity to display one's moral fiber. But I have to admit that he's right. When it comes to professional sports, I am a fair weather fan. If winning just isn't to be had, I'm just not interested. Jesus once had fans like that. The next day, the great crowd that had come to the festival heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem. So they took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's colt." His disciples did not understand these things at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered that these things had been written of him and had been done to him. So the crowd that had been with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify. It was also because they heard that he had performed this sign that the crowd went to meet him. The Pharisees then said to one another, "You see, you can do nothing. Look, the world has gone after him." The multitude that had come to Jerusalem for the festival heard that Jesus was coming to town. Jesus had quite the reputation after raising Lazarus from the dead. And so the crowds gathered their pom-poms and lined the streets, cheering, "Jesus, Jesus, he's our man. If he can't do it, no one can," as Jesus rode into Jerusalem in a monster truck. Okay, that's not exactly how it happened, but adjusting for history, I think that's how it felt. It's possible that there were 1 million people in the city. Of course, it's doubtful that all 1 million were watching the parade that day, but it still had to be a huge crowd lining the streets. The crowd took branches of palm trees and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna!" Now, the palm branches mean something. 2 centuries before, Judas and Simon Maccabeus had driven the Syrian forces out of Israel. Their victory was celebrated with music and, you guessed it, the waving of palm branches. For the people of Israel, for the people in Jerusalem that day, palms were a symbol of military victory. Hosanna was a word that meant save now. Now, what else would you say? Save us next month, maybe? When you want saving, now is the time. History tells us that the nation of Israel was chafing under Roman rule. And so their cheers that day were not an affirmation of faith. They were a declaration of national pride and military aspiration. For them, political concerns dominated their faith perspective. Aren't you glad that's not a problem for us? Perhaps they didn't notice the symbolism of Jesus' ride. He wasn't riding a powerful war horse like a great leader. He was riding a modest donkey, the steed of a servant. As the week went on, it would become clear that Jesus was not the Messiah they thought he was. He was not the Messiah they were looking for. And by the end of the week, there would be another crowd screaming, not in celebration, but in condemnation. God's answer to their question wasn't the answer they wanted to hear. The thing about fans is that whether you are a fair weather fan or a sold-out supporter, you're still not in the game. You're just an observer. You aren't the one sweating or bleeding in the contest. Fans also believe they know how the game should be played better than those who are on the field. The armchair quarterback always has better ideas than the folks getting beaten and bruised. And fans are looking for just one outcome: victory, and victory as they define it. Without that, the game just doesn't seem interesting. When it comes to faith, maybe it's better to be something more than a fan. Now, perhaps we shouldn't be too hard on those ancient Israelites. Just like them, we also want our world to be different than it is. We want a world without global disease. We want a world where Black people and Asian people and all people don't have to fear for their lives. We want a world where public servants are both respected and respectable. We want a world where we can trust in a fair and wise government. We want a world where natural disasters don't wipe out homes or end people's lives. Just like those ancient people of Israel, just like that crowd lining the streets that day, we want the world to be better than it is. And so we also cry, "Save us now." You know, they weren't wrong in that desire, and neither are we. They wanted the world to be better than it is, and so do we. But we need to rethink the methodology and the timing that we're looking for. You know, as far as timing goes, now is the only answer we know. Now is the only answer that we are willing to hear. As frustrating as it can be, God simply does not seem to feel urgency the way that we do. God doesn't worry, so God doesn't hurry. The biblical promise is that at the right time, God acts. But now is the only time we know, especially when a Roman sword is on your neck or the barrel of a gun is pointed in your direction. And as far as method, I think what we want is for God to fix the world so that bad things simply don't happen. You know, it's a curious perspective, because while we want bad things not to happen, we also kind of want God to stay out of our way so that we can do what we want to do. Essentially, we want God to control other people, but give us freedom. The problem is that a great deal of human suffering is because of human evil and human foolishness. I think a case can be made for all of it, but I'll settle for a great deal of it. Humans hurt because humans do what we want. And so Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey to set in motion God's solution to the problem of human suffering, human evil, human foolishness in the right time. Jesus would receive the pain of everything that's wrong in the world so that everything could be put right in the human heart. Jesus came to create God's kingdom in your heart and in my heart so that God's will can indeed be done on earth as it is in heaven. Jesus came not to create fans, but to create die-hard disciples, people who can live in the tension between this world and the new earth, between the now and the not yet. Followers who can live out 2 Corinthians 4:17 and 18. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. That's the kind of people we can be. Followers who can deny themselves and take up their cross to love and serve their neighbors in the here and now. Followers who can tell the story to his lost children. Followers who can bring food to his hungry children. Fathers who can give comfort to his grieving children and offer shelter to his homeless children. That's what a diehard disciple does. They don't sit on the sidelines and complain about the way the game is played. They get in the game with their sweat, their blood, and their tears. They take their lumps and they take their bruises. They don't have to have the ball. They're just thankful to be on the coach's team, and they are happy to run the play that the coach calls. So, brothers and sisters, don't be a fair weather fan, and don't even be a sold out supporter. Get in the game and be a diehard disciple, because that's the kind of man and that's the kind of woman that God uses to change the world. Follow the one who came not to be served, but to serve. The one who came not to get, but the one who came to give, and to give himself away. Not to grasp for what he deserved, not to cling to what he had a right to, not to pursue what he wanted, not to grasp for what he was entitled to, but to offer himself as a ransom so that you and I could become daughters and sons of God, so that we could have life, eternal and abundant.